Hi guys, I just wanted to do a quick video because my plan was to get kind of an overview video of the Avant Quad Xero S3M build up, and my original plan was to get it up on Friday or Saturday, and I did actually build it, but I've hit a few problems along the way which have slowed me down. So basically my original plan was to use this guy, which is the Furby B 20 amp F4 flight controller with 4-in-1 ASC stack, and as I mentioned in my previous video, I got this from Gearbest for about 30 quid, and I actually preferred this out of the two options that I had, and the reason being is this particular one, because it's connected via a 5-pin connector. Is it 5-pin? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, by a 5-pin connector, it makes it easier to replace one component if you accidentally break an ESC or you damage the flight controller, because you can of course just get another one and plug it in. The actual flight controller itself is pretty common. I've seen this particular flight controller on Banggood for, it's currently on flash sale for about £11.50 or something like that. But anyway, I originally built the quad to find out that this had a problem, and one of the ESCs wasn't working, and I've messed around with the cable, I've messed around with various things, and had no luck. So anyway, basically Gearbest are going to send me another one. I wouldn't go as far as saying this is rubbish. Now and again you get odd components. This is the first problem I've had from Gearbest, and in the 160 odd orders I've had from Banggood, I think I've had 4 or 5 issues with stuff from them, and they've always been refunded, etc. So I'm not really that worried. Sometimes you just get a duffer. So as I said, they're going to send me another one, and I'll see how that works. So what I did is I replaced it with the XJB 425 stack, which, as I mentioned in my weight saving video, is the one that connects via this central pin, which makes it far more difficult to replace one of these components if you break one. And I put this together, I built the whole thing, I hover tested it, I've even gone as far as flying it, and the issue that I had is I had 2 hot motors, not dangerously hot, but bearing in mind the other 2 were cold, it was worrying. And both motors that were hot were the clockwise ones, so the top left and the bottom right, so basically motors 1 and 4. And I've messed around trying to find out what the issue is, and I haven't had a lot of time to do that, so I'm still working on it. There's 2 likely causes. One, I've possibly got screws which are slightly too long, and I've checked these and I can't see that being the case. These are the 6mm screws which came with the frame itself, but what I've done is ordered some 5mm M2 screws just on the off chance. What I suspect the actual reason is one of 2 options. One, I've got a couple of dodgy motors, which is probably unlikely, or 2, it's a noise issue. And one of the downsides of using these little 20 by 20mm stacks is certainly this particular one where it mounts with this silly connector in the middle, is it makes it more difficult to get to soft mount your flight controller, because of course you're using M2 screws. It's a much smaller board, and the standard soft mounts that you would usually use on a full-size flight controller don't really work. A, they're too big, and B, they're too thick. So because this is so light, they won't really be I suppose flexible enough to help too much in vibration damping. So what I've done is I've mounted this on, and I mentioned this in a previous video, I've mounted this on 3M foam tape, and because this 3M foam tape is super strong, one difficulty you have is getting it off. So before I mounted and stuck it down, what I did is run some electrical tape across here, 1 strip there, 1 strip there, and doubled up this way, and then that will allow me to sit the flight controller and 4-in-1 ESCs over the top, and it means that if I do need to ever remove this at some point, it's far easier just to lift up the electrical tape than it is to try and unweld the whole thing from the 3M foam tape. The other issue I've got with this is on the initial stack, as you can see, the sorry, lost my train of thought. The battery connectors, the battery wire connectors are on the side here, and I didn't want that to be the case. So what I've had to do, because I can't turn this thing round without having my USB port at the front or the back, what I've had to do is basically solder to the pads here and then run the battery wire underneath and out the back, which isn't ideal but is the best solution that I can come up with. And because these pads are so tiny and these particular boards come with 18 gauge wire, which I didn't want to use, I don't think they're strong enough for the motors we're running on here, what I've had to do is use quite big solder blobs. I've actually run them underneath as well, just to make it a little bit more sturdy. So that's where I am at the moment. What I've also done is, once upon a time I bought some soft mounts from Banggood, and they were ridiculously small. You can't even really see them, but below the nuts here I've got little tiny rubber soft mounts in there. So basically I'm hoping that between the 3M foam tape and these tiny soft mounts here, that will be enough to remove a lot of noise, because one of the causes of hot motors is basically noise, and what happens is the filters within Betaflight have to filter out that noise, and the more noise that they filter out, the hotter your motors get. The strange thing is, why is it only 2? And that is the unanswered question at the moment. So this is really just going to be a suck it and see test. So what I decided to do, as I said, is I'm going to soft mount this as much as I can, and then I'm going to put the whole thing back together and I'm going to run it. As I said, the motors weren't dangerously hot. They were certainly hot to the touch, but not so you would burn your fingers. So I wasn't really concerned about damaging the motors. I was more concerned about why are only 2 motors hot. It's a bit of a head scratcher and something I haven't come across before. Now, as I said, I previously built this, and I decided to build it because the whole point of this was to build it as super light as possible, as I possibly could. I decided to use a VTX03 VTX in this, simply because these things weigh a couple of grams, and just run it with a whip antenna. I suspect, because I'm probably going to keep this build and not sell it, that I might actually change the whip antenna to a proper pagoda antenna, and I'll do that by simply adding the little TBS pigtail with an SMA connector on the end, and I'll just attach that to the Emax pagoda antenna. And the reason for doing that is, while it might add, I don't know, 6 or 7 grams to the total build weight, whip antennas are fine if you're racing around a small course or you're flying around a field, but as soon as you drop behind trees you start getting a lot of interference, and I'd rather just have, you know, as good a signal as I possibly can. But anyway, the original build that I made with these components and the top plate and everything else on came out at a weight of 128 grams, and I was pretty impressed with that. I think the pre-built you can get on Avant's website is possibly, can't remember what it was, 124 grams, something like that. But as you can see, I've added a buzzer to mine, and the reason why I've added a buzzer when I wouldn't usually bother is simply because this thing is so small I'm bound to lose it. And what I would generally do on a bigger quad is just set my ESCs up to chime after a minute or two, which will allow me to find the quad. The ESCs on this 20x20 stack are so small, they're not really going to generate enough noise via the motors to allow you to find the loss model easily enough. So as I said, I've just added a bit of weight on by putting a buzzer on there just for peace of mind. But if you imagine that 128 grams weight, if I get my little scales out, there's a bit of a fun bit of information here. 128 grams, and not so very long ago on UAV Futures, the Ormiton Japalura, or however you say it, was featured on that site with a weight of about 200 grams, so pretty heavy, and they absolutely loved it. This is a Firefly Q6 action camera, and it weighs 46 grams. So if I was to build this quad as I did before and add this action camera on top, obviously when the top plate's on, it will still weigh less than the pre-built Ormaton Japalura that was on UAV Futures. And these motors are more powerful. So that's kind of food for thought. When I was testing my original build, I did have a sneaky flight just to see what would happen, and I can confirm it's really fast, really fast, certainly a million times faster than any 3-inch build I've ever flown before. So weight is definitely the way to go with these smaller builds. But anyway, I thought I'd just give you a quick update as to where I was and what the delay was. But essentially I just haven't had the time, and I'm not going to have a lot of time this coming week to mess around with it. So that, you know, the full build video or the flight video might have to wait a bit. But none of these issues are to do with the frame itself. The frame itself I still absolutely love. The only slight downside of the frame, and there's always a few when you make such great weight sacrifices, or on, I don't know if you remember, it's not actually here at the moment, but on the back of this you've got one standoff, and basically what that means is if you decide to run a full cloverleaf or pagoda antenna, it's got to sit at the side of the standoff. When I use the Emax pagoda antenna, you've really got to push it tight against that standoff, otherwise your props will hit it. So it can be done, you can run an antenna, but you're going to have to mount it with tie wraps holding it against the rear standoff, otherwise you'll get prop strikes. And so far that's the only downside of this frame I've come across. I still absolutely love it. VTX03 is an absolutely fine VTX. The only thing I would say is because it's so light, it doesn't have a heatsink on it, and it generates a lot of heat when it's running at its full 200 milliwatts. So if you are going to run one of these, don't sort of wedge it down here. You want it in as much clean air as you can possibly give it. The other thing that I would mention is this little tiny camera is immense. The picture quality on it straight out of the box is really good. It's one of the few cameras that I've seen which has been set up for FPV pretty much straight out of the box. Usually you have to mess around with the settings to get it to get them to work well, but this little guy is absolutely fantastic. So that's that. So as I said, when I put all that together, it weighed 128 grams. It weighs less than a lot of 3-inch quads carrying an action camera, and I think it's the dog's bollocks. But as I say, I'll have to wait and see whether I've got two motors that like to run hotter than the others, or whether it's down to vibration damping. I should mention that when I did my initial test flight, I'd set beta flight for PT1. I removed notch filter 1, which increases more noise and makes your motors hot. And the reason why I did that is I've never found a quad yet that I've built that can't run on those settings. But I've never flown a tiny little 3-inch quad with motors this powerful before, or this lightweight, so it might just be a case of playing around with the settings. So anyway, it's all a bit of an experiment for me this. I've made lots of 4-inch super lights, I've made tons of 5 inches, but I've never made a 3-inch using tiny components like this. So I shall update you on my progress as to where I get on. And anyway, hope that was useful. Cheers guys, thanks, bye.